Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome to Q&A 66.
66.
Apparently, I want to sound like the Count from Sesame Street.
Well, this is probably going to be released.
66 Q&As.
It's going to be released sometime in November, but we're recording this very near Halloween. So it's appropriate for when we're recording it.
A couple of disclaimers before we launch into stuff, guys, on my end. I'm still in the room with the worst acoustics, which you probably already could tell by this moment, I imagine. And I got a bit of a cough, so I'm sorry if that ends up not being edited out sometimes. If I accidentally do it in the middle of talking and our wonderful Meg can't manage to scoop it out of the sound. So, hopefully, we'll see. Maybe the dog stays asleep. He's asleep right now, guys.
Awesome.
Don't be loud. I don't know. Actually, he sleeps through sound just fine. But yeah, other than apparently sounding like the Count and the fact that my brain is excited by numbers that are the same upside down and right side up, I can't think of much else to say about Q&A 66. So why don't you lead us off, Michelle?
All right, I will do that. So this one says, I'm extremely burnt out at my job, but I cannot afford to quit right now. Just in the past 2 days, I've gotten in trouble for 2 errors because I was working too quickly. And if I get another one, I'm in danger of being fired. The job is also remote, but they watch how often our computers are idle. So I also got in trouble for being inactive for 15 minutes last week. I don't know how not to dread going to work right now. I have therapy tonight, but I feel like I've been mentally depleted for so long. No amount of vacation time or weekends helps.
Ugh, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know. I super understand burnout at jobs. I was so fucking burnt out when I left community mental health. Here you go. Well, we'll see which family members of mine listen to this podcast now. Mwahaha. I'll confess something many people in my life don't know. I was so burnt out at community mental health, it caused me to take up vaping nicotine. At 35 or however fucking old I was and just how much I knew better. Oh my goddess. Anyway, it was ridiculous. So anyway, right, burnout is real. Burnout is hard. Burnout is heavy. So I just want to start by validating and acknowledging that because I could just really feel it in this person's message. Then, some thoughts. They say no amount of vacation time or weekends helps. There is no information about how they're spending them, so maybe they are already doing this. That being said, the first thing I think about when I think about someone saying there's no amount of time off or vacation or weekends or anything that helps, I wonder about the concept of, well, I think of it as kind versus nice. I've probably talked about that at some point on here.
I think you have.
But just briefly, basically, if you're being nice to yourself, that's like, I don't know, say that's like being nice to the kid in you, right? It's the in the moment pleasure, right? That's the, you know what, I can have this piece of pie for breakfast. I can lay around binge watching TV all day on a Saturday. I don't have to get up and go to the gym today. I can turn that alarm off, right? It's indulgence in the momentary desires that we have. And there's absolutely a necessary place for that in life. I don't in any way want to poo-poo being nice to ourselves because we absolutely ought to be nice to ourselves sometimes. In fact, I would say Michelle might say that that's one of the places where we clash most consistently, is that I try and get her to be nicer to herself.
I'm not very good at this one, everybody. I'm good at being kind.
You are
not so great at being nice.
Truth. Right, so absolutely being nice is important, and most things that we think of as stereotypical quote-unquote relaxing is kind of us being nice to ourselves, right? It's the chill out, kind of do nothing, laze around, relaxation kind of thing. Now, kind, on the other hand, is about refilling our cup, right? This is, what are we doing that's nourishing us, that's giving back to us, that is, may not be literally energetically, but more mentally, what is putting back more than it takes. An example for me might be something like spending all day on some sort of elaborate baking project, I would be wiped physically by the end of the day. That's a lot of being on my feet, a lot of bending over, a lot of arm work and stuff like that. I might be physically very, very worn out by the end. That being said, it would be very nourishing to me because baking is something that I'm passionate about, I enjoy, it's mentally stimulating and challenging for me. Like, there's just a lot wrapped up in it that's really positive. So that's a thing that I like to invite people to think about. Like, being kind to ourselves might also look like occasionally like, nope, I do need to do the adult thing. So, for the next hour, I'm going to sit down and pay bills before I get to binge watching my show. It may not feel very good in the moment necessarily, but it is contributing to your well-being in a way that can help more long-term. You are not suffering as much in that hour of doing paying bills as you might from knowing that those bills are hanging out over your head for the next week when you didn't spend the time doing it. So if this person is not, I would lean into being a little bit kinder to themselves, right? Doing things that are more nourishing, that give back more, that fill their cup, as opposed to doing the nice things that are nice, but don't tend to refuel us as much. To turn to things that are more explicitly DBT related, I thought of ABC pretty immediately for this person. Kind of all three letters, but especially the accumulating positive experiences in the short term and cope ahead, the C. So no offense, build mastery, but I didn't think it was the most important of the three here. Accumulating positive experiences, you guys know how much I love that one. I think it's a great way to stay sane when there's a whole lot of good reasons to be insane. It's just really noticing and really appreciating the tiny joys that are available to us all over the place throughout our days and lives. And with coping ahead, right? This, the person says, where is it? I don't know how to not dread going into work, right? Well, all right, so I say cope ahead. It could also be effective rethinking with paired relaxation. I just don't like that one as much. But spending time deliberately imagining your work going better, right? You coping with it in the way that you want to, right? You not dreading the experience, oh God, as I'm saying it, effective rethinking is probably better. It's just not a personal favorite, guys. I don't know why. I don't have any good reason why. But no, I do think actually it's probably better here. Because, right, I'm, from the way this person talks about it and from the way I have experienced burnout, I'm pretty sure they're talking a pretty good negative storm up in their heads about going into work each day, what the experience is going to be like, how long that's going to be dragging out into the future, their inability to quit, etc., etc., etc. So spend some time finding some more effective thoughts and practicing that skill, I would say, would be really important. And just generally speaking, mindfulness, right? I am absolutely certain that your job fucking sucks moment to moment, but imagining the next year of moments is gonna suck more than the suck of the moment, right? So doing what you can to stop future tripping and trying to stay present to whatever is, as opposed to piling a lot of maybe might be's on your head as a part of the emotional load that's already there from having such a stressful and icky job. Those are my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. That's all great stuff. I'm going to wind up coming back to some of it. I think at certain
really?
points. Yeah, there were definitely things. No, you certainly didn't take anything from me. Just certain things that stood out to you that also really stood out to me as being important. So we're probably just going to double down on a couple key pieces. The first thing, though, that stood out to me when I read this, and, this listener starts by talking about how they've been written up, and I got in trouble for these airs, I got in trouble for being inactive for 15 minutes and all that, and my impression is that, this is a challenging system to work in. And unfortunately, many workplaces are. Many workplaces have very high standards for their employees, sometimes that are unattainable, and they can often overlook the fact that their employees are humans with lives outside of work, and instead they just focus on productivity and things of that nature. So that felt important to me because I want to strike that balance between respecting what the listener is saying, which is basically, look, I can't afford to quit this job right now, so I'm trying to figure out how do I stay in this and get through it better, versus really emphasizing, too, that a lot of the things you may be struggling with at this job don't have anything to do with you, listener. They have to do with the system that you're in. And so I don't want you to be blaming yourself or getting hard on yourself for being a part of a system that's not healthy. You didn't create this system. You're just trying to survive in this system. So that having been said, there were a couple questions that I was curious about. I get curious about things sometimes when we read things from listeners where I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more here that we don't know, and I wish I knew. But even though I won't know the answers to these questions for you, you can ask these questions yourself, which is, I think whenever people are experiencing burnout in particular, but this can be burnout around a job, this can be burnout around like relationships, this could be burnout about a lot of different things. It's important to ask yourself what brought you here in the first place. Why did you decide to apply for this job? Why did you accept the job when it was offered to you? You got here somehow, right? Like if it's relationship burnout, why did you decide to start dating this person? There are big picture reasons here that we can easily lose sight of when we are just so in the grind and things are so bad in the current moment. It's really hard to zoom out and remember the big picture. And I don't care what your reasons are. There's no right or wrong answers to that question of what brought you here. You might be like, well, I took this job because the pay was really good. Okay, nothing wrong with that. We all work to make money at the end of the day. It's because the pay was really good. It might be like, ooh, the position itself sounded really interesting to me and like something I would enjoy. Oh, I took it because it was going to hopefully be a short commute. Even though this job is remote, but that could just be a general reason, not necessarily for this listener, but you got here for a reason. And does that reason still apply? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But if it still applies, I would encourage you to come back to that on the hard days, right? To be able to be like, okay, there may be these 10 things going wrong with this job right now that I hate. However, there is this one thing that is still true and good about this. If nothing else, there is a reason why I am still here, something that I'm benefiting from, even if I am in a really dysfunctional system that's not working for a bunch of other reasons. That can help you survive sometimes when you're just trying to survive, is remembering that there might be something good that you're getting out of the situation that you're in. Another question that I had was wondering if you have anybody who can be a support person for you. I understand you're working remotely. That makes this more challenging. I mean, for Kate and I, when we were in community mental health together, Lord knows that the lifeline for both of us was our co-working relationships with each other and some other people at the agency that we were at. I mean, on a bad day, at least I knew, okay, when I go in, I'm going to see Kate, and like Matthew was another close coworker and a few other people, right? So that was something that I looked forward to, and I knew that I had people in my corner who would get it on days that were hard. Do you have anybody who gets it? Even if you're working at home by yourself, do you have coworkers that you can like chat with or message with or text when you're off the clock or anything like that? Having support can make all the difference when you're in a tough work environment. I can't even tell you how many times, I've heard of people where they're like, I hate everything about my job except for the people I work with. They keep me in it day in and day out. I've heard that many, many times. So I don't know if that's the case for you. I hope it is. And if it's not, like, again, is there somebody at your job that you know that maybe you don't have a super close relationship, but you could get closer to, perhaps? I just hope you have someone in your corner to lean on. But now to get to some of the stuff and some DBT skills. Again, some of this is going to hit home with what Kate was already talking about. But what I was thinking of when it comes to workplace stress, it's important to find something to do before work, during work, and after work to cope. So what I was thinking of doing before work, and this is what Kate was talking about, where she's like, don't worry about how shitty the next 8 hours are going to be when you're starting work, trying to be mindful of what's going on in this exact moment, because at the end of the day, none of us have a crystal ball to know how good or bad our work days are going to be. We can suspect. You may have times where you go in and you're like, oh, today's just gonna suck. I mean, maybe. But if you check the facts, the question of what do I actually know, you cannot predict the future. You do not actually know what's going to happen. So that may be a helpful thing to remind yourself of before you even start your workday. Yep, like Kate was talking about, being really mindful, checking the facts, and coming back to, you know what, let me at least try to go into today with an open mind. Because I don't know how good or bad today is going to be. It's impossible for me to know. When you are actually on the clock during your workday, I was thinking that half smile and willing hands could be helpful. I like half smile and willing hands for work. I love those skills because they're subtle and you're in situations that you can't easily get out of sometimes, right? Like, I don't know, I'm thinking about back when I worked grocery and I would have to, stand in a check stand for hours at a time. Like, sure, I could take a bathroom break, obviously, if I needed to, but otherwise, like, that's where I'm gonna be. So how can I, calm my own stress? Oh, I could half smile. And it would make things a little easier. So if you can use half smile and willing hands, do it. You are also at home, which is nice. So you might have some other things you can utilize. I was telling one of my clients the other day who also works from home, and she's in a very stressful job environment. But I was telling her, like, try to make your at-home workspace, like, as pleasurable as possible. Make it, put stuff up on the wall around you. Light a candle next to you that smells good, which kind of goes into actually what I was thinking about for what you can do after work, which is to do some self-soothing. Do some kind of self-soothing activity. I mean, this doesn't have to be anything intense. This could be really brief. This can just be like, I have lotion that I put on every day when my workday ends, and I just sit there and I, just smell the lotion for a minute before I actually leave the room I'm in and I go on to like cook dinner or whatever you're going to do with your evening or your day. Do some kind of self-soothing to give you a little gap between your stressful workday and then re-entering your life. So those are the skills that I would recommend, but I hope things get better, whatever better looks like. I know better might not mean that anything is actually different at the job itself, but I hope that you can experience a little less stress while you're in this situation. Okay, on to you for the next one. Yeah.
All right. This one reads, question. Is there a connection between emotional regulation and quote-unquote sensitivity? I've always labeled myself as a generally sensitive person who just feels hurt easily. Could this be an emotion regulation problem?
This is an interesting question to ponder over. Because I think, yes, I'm just thinking real quick because we had a recent guest on, Jesse, and Jesse said something really insightful in his episode where he was our guest, because he said something about how a lot of times people think that emotion regulation means emotion suppression. Ooh. Isn't that good?
Yeah.
When he said that, I was just kind of like, I'm going to remember that. I'm going to use that all the time, because that's what a lot of people think. Like, oh, if I'm regulating my emotions, it means that I am just like tucking them into like this tiny little box and blah, 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 blah. And that's what I'm supposed to do. Just like not feel them. And no, actually what it is that like DBT wants you to feel your emotions, but emotion regulation can become a problem when we are expressing the emotions that we're feeling in an unhealthy way, which I classify as hurting yourself, hurting another person, or hurting property. If your emotions are leading you to do any of those three things, that is problematic. So when you're saying like a sensitivity and emotion regulation problem, I'm like, nope. Like not in those regards, right? Because I doubt being sensitive is leading to you hurting yourself, another person, or property just in and of itself. Emotion regulation can also be a problem if you're feeling emotions so intensely, though, that it's leading to interfering with functioning. right? You're missing lots and lots of work. You're having a really hard time completing tasks. And I'm not talking like a day or two where you're kind of off. I'm talking like the better part of weeks of just like, I'm not getting anything done because I'm just drowning in my emotions. That can also be problematic. And it's possible that with being more on the emotionally sensitive side of things and feeling emotions bigger, which is I think what this person is getting at, like most people, something happens to them and they might feel sadness at like a 3. And they're like, no, for me, I feel sadness at a 9, right? Like that's kind of what they're getting at. It could be that because of that, it might be leading to you struggling with functioning in your life. So if that's the case, yes, right? Emotion regulation skills could potentially help you get to a place where you are able to return to the level of functioning that you want to be at as you're moving through the world. But I view it as the main task of emotion regulation skills. Like, why do we have them? What are they good for? It's to actually help us express our emotions in a healthy way, not to keep them inside, but to express them. And a lot of times, though, what that means is that if you are an emotionally sensitive person who feels things very strongly, you might need to first practice bringing the emotional intensity down for yourself. Because if you are feeling things at like an 8 or above, you are at risk for unhealthy emotional expression. Or you are at risk of your emotions being so big that they are going to interfere with your functioning. You're at risk for that if they're really high like that a lot of the time. So, emotion regulation skills can help you bring that emotional intensity down to like, I don't know, a 7 or below. I often think of like the sweet spot with our emotions as being like a 4 to a 7. 3 or below. I mean, yeah, we have things that we feel throughout our days that we don't feel very strongly. Okay, great. But when you're I like between a 4 to a 7, it means you're probably really in touch with what you're feeling. You're in it, you're feeling it, but it's not overwhelming you. And it's totally possible, listener, that like with the emotional sensitivity that you're describing, like, yeah, you may feel things really strongly, but again, it doesn't mean that you're expressing things in an unhealthy way. And it doesn't necessarily mean either that the emotions that you're feeling are interfering with your functioning, in which case, I don't think there's any problem going on here. Those would be kind of the 2 categories where I think emotional sensitivity could become problematic. So I hope that makes sense. And I know I didn't give any skills here for anything. But I also wasn't sure if there were any skills that needed to be said. Because again, are we actually talking about a problem? I think that's the question. Like, is it even a problem that needs skills? And I don't know if it necessarily is. Unless it's one of those 2 things I mentioned. I also actually thought of one other thing in my notes that I didn't mention, which is that my other guess with this listener and a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm emotionally sensitive or, that kind of a thing, is that you probably got that messaging from someone somewhere. People have probably told you that throughout your life, like that they think the way you express your emotions is problematic. Like, I don't know, they might say things to you like, well, you shouldn't cry so much. Or like, this isn't anything to get upset about. Or that type of messaging. And again, they can feel that way, right? They can think that you're expressing things too strongly. But as long as it's not hurting yourself, another person, or property, I don't care how much you cry. Like, I don't care if something makes you, again, feel upset at a 9 and everyone else like a 2. I don't care. That doesn't mean that the way you're expressing your emotions is unhealthy just because other people may think it's too much. That feels important to say.
It's funny, Michelle, sometimes it's like I steal bits from you or I can't or whatever. But honestly, I was like, I can't think of much else to add to the answer to the question. Like one of the things I was thinking about that might be helpful for this listener might just be something of an explanation for potentially at least part of why they might just be a sensitive person, right? There are people who are just born into the world with buskier amygdalas, right? Where that part of their brain just is just larger. It
Yep.
just is.
It's true.
There
are studies around this stuff.
Yep. And if you have a larger amygdala, you're gonna feel some things more strongly, right? Especially stuff that is in the less pleasant side of things, right? Fight or flight kind of things more. I just wanted to say to the listener that, you know, it may not be anything that you could even conceivably have control over, that you which is another one of the reasons that I agree that it is not inherently a problem.
Yeah.
But just like Michelle was saying, it's what you do with your feelings that determine what's a problem and what's not. That being said, right, obviously, again, I think I'm just restating what you said, only very slightly differently, which is, you know, it could certainly contribute to a propensity for emotion regulation issues, right? It's like, I don't know, everybody who's swimming, if you have a stronger stream, you're going to have to work harder, right? Like, that's true.
A good metaphor. Yeah,
Right? But that doesn't mean you're not able to swim, right? That doesn't mean you're not able to fight the current. It just means that you're at a baseline going to have to work a bit harder, which is not necessarily fair, but, can I even remember which one it is? It's like I wish I could picture things. 6th skill training assumption? Someone check the sheet and tell us if we got that right. We may not have caused all our own problems, but they're still ours to solve or something. I'm paraphrasing slightly. That's what this one makes me think of, right? Like, it's not your fault that you've got a stronger amygdala than most people, but it's still your brain. That's one you've got. So that's still where your work is. But yeah, those were just my thoughts around it. Not much to add to what you said, Michelle, but some slightly different wording.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, the next one says, hello, Michelle and Kate. I have a question. I recently started therapy for my BPD, and so far, it's been going well. My psychologist is very knowledgeable about DBT and has worked with BPD clients for 25 years. My question is that I feel numb after my session. I release a lot of emotions during my session, feeling vulnerable and heard, but after the call has dropped, I feel so empty. What skills would best help with this? Thanks.
Yeah, no, I love this question. It makes me think of like event drop, or for the. Sorry, I'm just chuckling because I don't often talk directly to this part of my existence. But like in the kink scene, after a scene, you get a big emotional drop sometimes, right? Or things like that. There's certain parts of of my world where it's kind of common to experience this. Like I'm having a lot of feelings, and then all of a sudden I feel sort of emotionally vacant. I wish I knew a little bit better exactly what's going on neurochemically, but I do believe it's almost literally being spent, right? Like your brain can only produce so many chemicals so fast on such a timeline, especially if it doesn't know that it's suddenly going to be asked to produce a lot more than it usually is. It takes a while to catch up. And so you get kind of dumped, right? You're just like, okay, I have to literally recoup from this emotional dump. So part of it is just like, don't feel weird or bad or broken or anything about it. It's a really normal physiological process to go through when you've experienced something that's an emotional quote unquote high. That doesn't mean pleasant emotion. That means high intensity emotional experience. So that's all, is just start off with normalizing it. Now, what can you do though that might help? Either help you, perhaps prevent you from feeling as numb in the first place. There we go. And or help you recover afterwards. So I think about things that you might be able to do in the session or have waiting. Like during the session, I think about like self-soothing things, especially. So maybe having a hot blanket. I mean, that would be awesome. Have a hot blanket. That sounds amazing. Not what I was trying to say, but I have hot beverage and snuggly blanket, and my brain just skipped the words in the middle there. Right, but maybe bring a favorite hot beverage into session with you, or some sort of snuggly blanket or a stuffed animal, something comforting to touch. There are things to soften the emotions sort of in the moment, soften your physical being in the moment that might keep you from reaching the place in the first place that's quite so fever pitched that you end up with the drop afterwards. Not to withhold from your emotional experience, but just gentle it out a little bit neurochemically. And or afterwards, taking, if you can, I know life does not always allow for this, try and take a 30-minute break. after session, between session and the rest of life. If you've listened much, you might have heard me talk about, like, I don't know, different brains. I think of it as sort of being emotionally like different size of watercraft in how fast they can turn around, right? How fast you can emotionally shift gears and about face. Mine is a pretty fucking big boat. It takes me a long time. So I think maybe also part of what you're experiencing is just too much sort of whiplash at the end of the at the end of the session with your emotions. If you've been really vulnerable, if you've been really present, if you've been really experiencing and releasing a lot of emotions during session, then you're just like, boop, back to life. All right, like that just might be too much for your brain and your body to kind of reconnoiter and get back on track that soon. It might be asking a little bit too much of it. So if you can take maybe 30 minutes of buffer time after your session before jumping back into whatever life is demanding of you, or longer, I mean, maybe an hour, cool. Not a lot of lives may allow for that. So yeah, I think those are my 2 ideas. Oh, if you have a pet, they're good to touch. They're very good for emotion regulation, self-soothing kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, assuming they're being cuddly pets and not, like, I don't know, being rabid little monkeys. But generally speaking, pets are good for grounding and helping in those ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was thinking the same thing about what happens, and I'm with you, Kate. Neurochemically, I'm not going to be able to explain it very well. But I learned about this way back when I was getting trained before I worked at Phoenix House, the girls' group home, where I first learned about DBT, because they would talk about how what happens when somebody escalates is that, the emotion goes up, 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 up. And then once they kind of reach the peak and it's like released in some way, oftentimes not always a healthy way, but it gets released, right? Then there's this precipitous drop, and there is this exhaustion period that follows before you kind of even out and return to baseline. So what I actually really want to say, listener, is that I don't know how much this will help. I hope it helps a little bit, but I think it's something to be proud of, actually, that you are going through the work in therapy that you're doing. Because you're really opening up, you're really working through something. And that period that follows after session where you're just like, ugh, I'm just wiped. I don't feel like I can function. Like, for me, I don't have every therapy session like that. But Kate has certainly seen me a time or two after some of them where I'm just like, we'll get on, because a lot of times we podcast after my therapy sessions. That's just how my days look. But we'll get on, and I'm just like, I'm not thinking very good right now. I'm trying to put things together. I'm trying to explain what just happened or what I felt, and some days I can do it easily, and then other days it feels like a real struggle. And on the days that it's a real struggle, it's because I did some work. I did some work in that therapy session. So this is a sign that you're feeling what you need to let yourself feel, and you're healing what needs to be healed. I'm not saying it feels good or pleasant, because it really doesn't. It doesn't feel good. But it's a good thing, if that makes sense. I love all of Kate's suggestions. I would also add on that another skill that could be helpful is improve. When your sessions are done, Kate talks about giving yourself a 30-minute waiting period. Maybe during those 30 minutes, doing something from improve could be helpful, right? You have an option of 7 things there to pick from. I would pick one of those during that in-between time that we're recommending you give yourself. I also am a big fan of journaling. You can journal in your session. I don't know why. It's just a thing that's been happening lately. I've had more and more clients showing up with notebooks to sessions, which I love. I've had more people I'm not telling them to do it. They're just spontaneously bringing notebooks, so they'll occasionally take notes in session, or, they'll show up with things already written in their notebook that they want to make sure they talk about. So you can journal before, during, or after your sessions to help take in what you're processing, and that may help you feel like you're better keeping in touch with it. because I kind of read between the lines here to maybe sense that what you're struggling with in this is maybe less about the immediate exhaustion that follows. Like, yeah, I mean, I understand not liking that. But also that on a deeper level, it's like, okay, I show up and I do this work for, say, 50 minutes once a week, and then it just feels like it's gone. And people will say that a lot about therapy. They're like, yeah, I show up, I do therapy, and then I forget. Like, it's weird. It's just, it happens, but it's hard for me to hold on to. It's hard for me to remember and come back to, and I want to, right? I want to be able to remember it and keep it with me as I go about my real life. I mean, isn't that kind of the goal and the point? And that you may be struggling to do that because afterwards it just all, kind of hits you and depletes you and everything. So journaling, again, can be a very helpful tool for that, right? If it's like, what were we talking about in my session 2 days ago? Let me go to my journal. And again, you could do journaling in that 30-minute in between period as something to really help you. So hopefully those suggestions will, I don't know, not like make this experience go away. I don't think that's what Kate or I necessarily want or would expect, but have it be that you feel a little more in the driver's seat of what to do when this is what's happening for you after your therapy sessions.
All right, on to the last one.
Last one, yep.
All right, this one reads, what about when you name your emotions and understand them and try to regulate and process and they just stick around and you're stuck in them for weeks on end?
What a good question. Great questions. My immediate reaction when this listener said this, I was like, that's not an emotion problem. That's a thought problem. So way back, I don't know what dates. I did not look it up beforehand. Kay and I recorded 2 episodes, but this would have been years ago now, about Emotions 101.
Oh, God. Yeah, that would have been in the first year of the podcast.
Yeah, long time ago. But Kate, I'm guessing it was probably you. When we led groups together, it was you who would talk about how, emotions run their course in about 30 seconds in our body. 90. Thank you. It's been a while since I've talked about this. 90 seconds. Thank you, Kate. Something happens. We think something, we feel something, we do something. Well, that feeling part is about 90 seconds, assuming that we then go on to have a different thought. If we go on to have a different thought, that is then going to lead to a different emotion that may follow, or again, the same emotion, but maybe slightly tweaked or adjusted. The story that I used to tell when we would lead groups together is back when we would all be in the same room, pre-COVID times, is I would tell people during the night when we would talk about emotions, I would say, okay, let's imagine we're all sitting here in this room. And let's say, just now, a lion walks into the room. Well, what would we do? Like, we might have different responses. Some people might try to, pick up chairs or, fight the lion off. Some people might try to run, climb out the windows, get as far away as they can. Right? Fight or flight, everybody. We'd have different responses, but we would all have some kind of reaction to this lion entering the room. And by and large, the emotion that we would probably all feel is fear. That's probably what would happen. Now, let's say this lion walks into the room. We all get really scared, but then the lion turns around and leaves. Nobody gets hurt. Nothing happens. The lion just walks away. We'd probably all be sitting there being like, that was really weird. And Kate and I would probably just end group immediately and be like, we can't continue. We all need to emotionally process what just happened. Okay? So we'd all feel fear. Now, the next week, group would happen again. And probably for most participants, they would show up and they would feel afraid coming into group again. Why would they be feeling afraid? The lion isn't there. The lion's gone. So the lion's not there that second week of group. We're all just sitting in the room. Everything is fine. Everything is safe. So why would people feel scared? Because they are thinking about the lion. They're wondering, oh my gosh, is that lion going to come back? Their bodies are preparing, right? So their hearts might be racing a little faster. Maybe that entire week in between group, they were thinking about the lion and talking about it with their family and their friends, being like, oh my gosh, the craziest thing happened at my DBT group. This lion came into the room. I don't know if I can go back there because what if this lion comes back in? It's all driven by thoughts. When we have emotions that we feel for long periods of time, assuming that what is triggering that emotion is removed. Obviously, if the lion came into the room and was in there for an entire hour, people would naturally be feeling fear for the entire hour because that 90-second cycle of feeling the emotion would just go round and round and round and round and round. The trigger is there in the room. But once the triggers are moved, yeah, we can still feel our emotions for a long time because we're thinking about what happened and our thoughts drive our emotions. So to answer the question of what about what you can do when this happens, skill I thought of was check the facts. Pull out a check the facts worksheet and do it. Again, sometimes we recommend quick check the facts. Like I did, I think, with the first listener with the burnout. I'm not recommending that listener do a check the facts worksheet every day before work. I just want that listener to ask themselves, what do I actually know about my workday? Probably not much. Okay, let me go in and see what happens. In your case, listener, I want you to do a check the facts worksheet. Do it in depth with whatever emotion you are feeling. Really try to get to the bottom of that. Another worksheet that could be helpful here is if you are facing a decision that you need to make in your life and that's what's creating stress for you. Pros and cons, that's a great worksheet to do around decision making. But ultimately what you need to do here is target your thoughts. Because if you can get underneath what you're thinking, and really starting to notice how much time you may be spending thinking about it every day, then that's what's going to change your emotional experience if you can first change your thoughts. So that's what I was thinking. What about you, Kate?
Well, my first thought was actually wondering if it was... All right, so I just said sadness or depression as an example, but is it acute or chronic? Emotion? Yes, exactly, right? There's a neurochemical difference between I'm sad and I'm continuing to feel sad for weeks and I am suffering from depression, right? Like they are not the same thing. So if it's depression or general anxiety or, one of those things that's just a neurochemical baseline for some people, that's a different thing. So the first question was just, is it being labeled appropriately, whatever's going on for that person? Because it can be easy to mislabel those things, to interchange them. That makes a lot of sense and is easily done. That being said, if it is an actual emotion, to piggyback on the end of your talking about doing a check the facts worksheet, Michelle, I have opposite action as the first skill that I thought about. Right? If you have named the emotion, worked to understand it, worked to regulate and process it, and there it be, now's a great time to work on opposite action, right? That's actually probably the most common time and way that I use opposite action. It's not necessarily because the emotion itself didn't fit the facts, but because, sort of like Michelle's with the lion story, but because the emotion doesn't now fit the facts.
Yeah, exactly.
It no longer fits the facts, right? I've done all the work that's needed to be done with this feeling. It's time to move the fuck on. So I thought opposite action could be really helpful for this person in that regard. Sometimes it can help to move on or past an emotion to find meaning in it. So the M from improve, which I always feel a little dirty suggesting, considering
that
the thing I teach about it.
Not your favorite. You don't like the M from improve.
I like it when it's self-generated, which is exactly what I was about to say. I hate it when people tell me to find meaning, so I'm sorry. But if it's a thing that works for you, this could be a good place to internally generate some meaning, right? That's when I have something that's clinging, sometimes being able to find meaning in it is a way that I can sort of let it pass the rest of the way. Always self-soothing, right? Assuming the emotional, isn't at too much of a fever pitch, right? Isn't too intense of an emotion. Most of the time I feel like when they stick around for weeks on end, they don't tend to be high acuity. So I was imagining self-soothing could be helpful that way. Mindfulness of emotion specifically, like what does that emotion need or want? I'm certain that at some point I've done the emotion on a bench closing moment in the podcast somewhere. I don't know.
We've actually had people email us specifically about that one, being like, that was a really powerful closing moment, but I can't remember which one it is. It's one of my favorites.
Right. Anyway, so it's there somewhere, guys. Easter egg hunt. But the idea being that sometimes, an emotion maybe is sticking around because, I don't know, for lack of a better word, it's needed. You haven't taken the memo yet. Like you think you have, right? You think you've named it and understood it and processed it. But what does it need? I don't know. For me, for instance, when my anxiety tends to drag on, it's because I need to make life changes. And until I make life changes, the anxiety will stay because it is a reaction to that stimulus, right? To that trigger. So what does your emotion need? Perhaps having a conversation with it, literally or metaphorically, however you want to think about it, may help. If you can fulfill that need in some fashion, that may also help you allow the emotion to move through and past. And then, Michelle, you talked about the 90-second rule, so I won't go into it too much, but I just had the question of, are you spamming your own buttons, which is essentially your whole thing, right? Which is like, stop doing it to yourself. Oh, man, it was so annoying. Michelle, it's funny. It's not always that this happens, but I literally had that yesterday. I did that skill. I was sitting in my dining room being all upset about a thing, and I was like, you are just keeping yourself upset by thinking about it. You're spamming your own buttons, Kate. I actually had that thought to myself. I was like, you're spamming your own buttons. Think about something else. And fuck me if it didn't work. So
once we see it, it's so much easier to then, do something about it and take control of it. And,
Yeah. So anyway, guys, I just think it's funny. I haven't always used one of the skills I'm talking about within a day of talking about it on here. But it really is helpful sometimes to realize that you're doing it to yourself, sadly. Hard to take ownership of, but really empowering when you do.
Agreed.
So that's me.
Oh, well, that's the end of this Q&A. I really liked some of the questions we got this time. You guys asked great questions. Really insightful stuff to think about and work on. So if you have questions for us, you can either send them our way in an email or you can post about them in the Facebook group. If you haven't already joined, go ahead and join the Facebook group. And you can post your questions there, and we would love to hear from you all. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in to your Facebook profile and search for DBT and Me podcast.